Hello, Steevio here. Yeah, it's quite a long time since I did a demo video, so I thought I'd do a new one because I've got a new rig now. It's very similar to the old one, but it's much more compact and things are being changed around a bit, and there's a lot more crammed into the cases. So it's got more potential basically. So I'm stopping this video very briefly just to explain the purpose of it. I just want to briefly demonstrate some of my techniques for improvisation, mainly in the realm of note sequencing, as I don't really have time in this short demo to go into any depth on the other aspects. Now, the main thing that becomes an issue when you're improvising is changing things and moving on to grooves and patterns without breaking the flow, especially in a club environment. If you've got a dance floor full of people, you can't just stop or take too long to change things. So you have to have techniques for moving things forward and keeping things interesting once you've settled on a tune. Now, my rig's specifically designed for this purpose. However, it's 98% analog and I don't have any sequences or patches saved. Everything I do is totally on the fly. This is entirely deliberate. I like to make music that I'm hearing for the first time along with the audience. So you must have systems in place to facilitate this. So what you'll see at the start is the end of the same tune from an improv video I put out on YouTube quite recently called Steevio Live Improv 28-10-19. And the reason I'm using that is it's just how I left the rig when I was last improvising. Then I'm going to morph it into something else by doing things like altering the length of sequences, switching octaves, changing sequencer stop and start points, altering the envelope that is controlling the second sequencer, inverting groups of VCOs, as well as using the switch matrix to alter the sequences. I'm not going to touch the percussion sequences in the left case, but all the techniques can be used with that as well. But for the purpose of this quick demo, I'm just showing you mostly this right case. try to explain the basic layout of the rig, and we'll start with the left hand case just briefly. I will concentrate more on the right hand case eventually. So the left hand case contains most of the percussion voices, although tuned percussion is in the right hand case and is effectively just other synth voices. So we have dedicated modules for kick, hi-hat, snare, shakers, various types of high percussion sounds and the bass. This case also contains the sequencers dedicated to rhythm, although again the tuned percussion is controlled from the sequencers in the right hand case. For this purpose I have these two Dofer A155 sequencers and A154 controllers, which can run independently. These are where I create my percussion patterns and accents for the whole rig. The left case also contains this module here, which is the 4MS quad clock distributor, and that is linked to the quad ADSR next to it. It's an important module in that it can provide various divisions of the master clock, and the ADSR used for controlling various filters and modulating lots of different percussion parameters. And I specifically use the fourth output for controlling sequences, which I'll explain shortly. So the right hand case also has two Dofer A155 sequencers and A154 controllers, which provide gates and CVs for all the synth voices. Now these are controlled in various ways, so apart from the onboard manual controls here, we can send envelopes from the quad clock distributor and ADSR setup from the left hand case I showed you earlier, and stop and start triggers from the IntelliGel U step in that case as well. So I'm going to concentrate on the note sequencing side of things, which is where most of the changes from our previous rig are implemented. And also I'm going to try and explain how I manipulate sequences on the fly. Okay, there are 4 rows of CVs, and what I've done is dial in some really basic patterns of CVs into each one, and no more than 3 different voltages in each, one of which will be 0 volts. For instance, this top row has 2 steps of 0 volts, 2 of a higher voltage, 2 steps of 0 volts again, and 2 steps of a higher voltage. And of course these will create different notes depending on how you have your quantizer set. And there are different mathematical patterns in each row. Now the reason for this simplicity is that I'm going to add these sequences together in precision adders to create much more complex sequences to send to the VCOs. So by starting with simplicity, it's much easier to build up more complexity later without things getting out of control. So the 4 CV outputs here are going to these 4 precision adders here, and each one receives all 4 sequences, so they're all mirrored. This means I can create 4 different sequences at the outputs, which are various combinations of the 4 CV streams, by adding and subtracting the patterns. Now these outputs go to the 4 inputs on these 2 Tubutech MuTune quantizers. Again, simplicity here is the key. So for this particular demo I've only got 3 note scales programmed into each. Now the reason for this simplicity is that I'm going to potentially add these note sequences together in different ways in the next module, which is the Hinton switch mix 8x8 switch matrix, which is also another precision adder. So for instance here I've got a C, D sharp and a G in the first quantizer, and in the second I've got a C, F and an A sharp. These are both simple subsets of the C minor scale, but of course you can put whatever scales you like into these. You can make up your own scales of any length, you can use microtonal scales, but for the purposes of this demo I'm keeping it really simple. So I'm sure you can see there's an almost unlimited potential for creating complex patterns of CVs for sending to the VCOs in lots of different combinations, before and after the quantizers. Before they are all under close control, then after it's left up to experimentation as to what comes out. So by adding pre-quantized intervals together, you get really unusual combinations that aren't limited by the scales. Okay, so this is the hint and switch mix, and this is at the heart of the rig really for creating note patterns. And it's an 8x8 switch matrix and also a precision adder. So we've got 8 inputs here and 8 outputs. Now the first 4 are coming from the 2 Tubitech quantizers, and these last 3 here are coming from these 2 HP quantizers. Now the purpose of these is to add various interval offsets, and for this demo the first one is acting as a master transpose for the whole rig. So these offsets can be used to create chords across various VCOs or transpose individual or multiple VCOs. So the 8 outputs go to various VCOs. I'm only using 6 in this example. This top one's going to the bass VCO, this one's going to the high tune percussion voice, this one to the low tune percussion or synth voice, and these 3 here are going to these modules up here, which are the AJH synth mini mod modules. So these are 3 VCOs and this one's a filter, and these have basically replaced the Moog Voyager which I used to have, which was very bulky for carrying around to gigs, and now everything's in the case, and also they can receive individual CV inputs, so you can run different sequences in each VCO. So to conclude, I can send whichever sequence I want to whichever VCO I want, and I can add the sequence events together as well as add offsets in lots of different ways to create new sequences. So lastly, I'm going to quickly explain the sequencer manipulation side of things very briefly. So back to the sequencers, and the top sequencer is running in pendulum mode, and it is being stopped and started by the U step in the other case. I've quite simple stop and start patterns programmed into it which I can change on the fly. Now the second sequencer has the envelope from the quad ADSR from the other case which I mentioned earlier, and this is controlling the direction of the sequence and at the same time modulating the position of the first step. So by changing the parameters on the envelope, you can quite drastically change what the sequence is doing. So for instance, lengthening the decay of the envelope will change the direction pattern and at the same time move the start point of the sequence. Now in this demo I'm doing that, but also manually changing the end point to create interesting variations and eventually moving the tune onto something else altogether. So you can see it here. If you look at the lights on the bottom sequencer, you can see when I change the end point, it changes what's going on, the sequence does different things, and this creates variety, and also you can completely change the tune into something else. So that's how I do my live sequencing basically. So I'd probably advise you to watch the whole thing again at the beginning so that you see all these techniques in action, and then maybe you'll understand them more easily. I hope that's been some help to some of you guys. Thank you for watching and listening, and I wish you all happy tweaking for the next decade.